Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? Let's pretend it's Monday, shall we? It's Monday, September 26th, 2022. That would, of course, make it Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year holiday, which means I'm out for the morning, celebrating a Happy New Year, which is a backwards occurrence for those of you who don't celebrate the Jewish New Year, I guess. Why would you be up early in the morning on New Year's Day celebrating the New Year? Well, I don't know. Because religion something, I guess. So Shana Tova to all who celebrate. Shana Tova to everybody, really, whether you celebrate or not. Isn't that that's the fashion now, of course. If I explain it to you or say it in English, I should be able to, and you or insist that I say it in English, I should be able to huffily insist to you that just like everybody has to say Merry Christmas because that's what it is, well, everybody has to say Shana Tova because that's what it is. And when are you going to get over it? Okay, well, anyway, more tolerantly speaking, we would say, hey, if it's a new year, whether on a lunar calendar or anything else, you want to wish everybody a happy new year, right? I guess, except Nazis, screw them, I suppose. But anyway, why are we occupying ourselves with them? And the answer is, don't worry about it because it's not actually Rosh Hashanah yet because I'm recording this ahead of time so that therefore you would have this to listen to. I felt bad about leaving you all on your own if you weren't busy at temple celebrating the New Year. If you're at home celebrating the New Year, or at work celebrating the New Year, or not celebrating the New Year, whatever you're doing. I had lots of great stuff to share with you on Friday, and as usual, ran out of time to share all the really weird, deep in the weeds, or full stories with you. I wanted to revisit the one we left with on Friday, because, of course, I planned the whole day to make that the first thing that we dealt with on Friday. But, reality got in the way and lots of other interesting stories were out there. You may recall, and if you don't, you could go back and re-download Friday's show, or if you missed it, download it for the first time, that I began with the tweet of, I began this series of stories with the tweet of one Christian Vanderbrook, with an unusual spelling of Vanderbrook, by the way, V-A-N-D-E-R. That part is easy. B-R-O-U-K. Broke. Well, at any rate. Christian Vanderbrook tweets as Urban Achiever, though he spells Achiever oddly because we're shortening things because it's Twitter. The Achiever part is A-C-H-I-E-V-R. Just Achiever. And actually listed in his bio here is proud 43 for America alum. Well, you remember who 43 was. That would have been George W. Bush. So, a Republican guy, you should be clear about that, and lists a byline in The Bulwark. And you remember that we did eventually make our way to a Bulwark article that he had written that was about the strange, the particular and strange nature of the pre-2020 election wargaming that had gone on at Claremont Institute and how oddly specific it got about the violence that was going on that day. Although it didn't nail it directly on the head, it was oddly a lot closer than most of the other war games that were conducted. And of course, Claremont Institute is home to John Eastman, and isn't it weird that, when push came to shove and they actually had to, some actors had to decide whether or not they were going to resort to violence over the election. It was Eastman who found himself most central to the planning and the execution, or rather at least the use of the violence for legalistic, maybe, ends. Anyway, I thought it was all very interesting. And I had read you Christian's tweet here, and it was the beginning of a thread, but it didn't quite make as much sense since I did it the way I did it. I thought I might revisit it and lay it out. Their tweet, you may recall, or you may be completely confused by this whole thing, reads, and it's a quote here, The storming of the Capitol was another sensitive topic for senior management, and then including in brackets, which management are we talking about? Management at the Heritage Foundation. Coffey, remember him? And we didn't know exactly who it was, and it turned out to be Luke Coffey. Coffey, Coffey, recalls being required by management to remove a Twitter post condemning the January 6th Capitol riot. So it seemed like an odd place to jump into this discussion. And then I mentioned included was a link to an article in the Dispatch, which was entitled Partisanship Over Policy at the Heritage Foundation. We read a little bit about that, or a little bit of that article. Now, I think the thing to do here, or the thing to have done, would have been to go to Christian's second tweet in the thread, replying to himself, of course, and saying, hey, to Kevin Roberts, Texas. Kevin Roberts, TX, is called out in this post. Kevin Roberts, president of the Heritage Foundation, in case you didn't know because you didn't follow with things since, what was it, Jim DeMint, remember him? Was president, and I didn't even realize he wasn't anymore, or maybe he's some other high official there. Anyway, Kevin Roberts of Texas, who is also a American historian and professor, now president of Heritage. Maybe Jim DeMint is president of Heritage Action. I don't even remember how they structure their place anymore. But anyway, he's being called out in here. Hey, Kevin Roberts, under previous leadership, I don't know, maybe it was even DeMint, Heritage posted that Americans, quote, should categorically and consistently reject violent groups like the Oath Keepers. Is that still your view? And he, I guess, links to their statement to that end. And let's see, maybe that was Jim DeMint making that statement, and then he ended up getting bounced. I don't know. It actually links to an article, Americans Should Condemn Political Violence in All Forms, January 26th, 2021. Commentary, no Jim DeMint here. Commentary under the Heritage banner here, heritage.org, by James J. Carafano. I think I've seen his name around. Laura Ries, R-I-E-S, and Mike Gonzalez, neither of whom are as familiar to me, but they are respectively. Carafano is vice president of the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute. Don't ask me, I don't know. Laura Ries is director of Border Security and director, Border Security and Immigration Center. At Heritage? Elsewhere? Don't know. And Mike Gonzalez, Angelis T. Arredondo E. Pluribus Unum Senior Fellow. .org, .edu, .gov, whatever. I don't know, their credentials. And anyway, I don't want to go down. I kind of do, but I kind of don't at the moment. Want to go down the rabbit hole. Obviously here, a Heritage Foundation commentary, but published with some prominent names and put on their front page about how, Americans should condemn all political violence. I don't want to say this. In all its forms. Anyway, so back to where we were. Christian Vanderbrook calling out Kevin Roberts saying, hey, remember when they used to say things like this? That Americans should categorically and consistently reject those who use violence to assault the constitutional foundation of this exceptional nation, whether it's the Oath Keepers, Antifa, or other organizations. Now, Christian goes on with the third tweet here. Here's the post condemning the Capitol riots that Heritage Management ordered to be removed. And it is the tweet of Luke Coffey, bringing this circle to a close. Luke Coffey tweeting, I don't know when, but, September 1st? Is that right? Oh, no, this is a throwback Thursday. Oh, he misspelled Thursday. Don't tell him. So on September 1st, he was reminding everybody of that time he posted a tweet which read, I guess it must have been contemporaneous with January 6th. What is happening, in Washington, D.C. is a national embarrassment. This is un-American. These violent protesters unlawfully entering the Capitol are not patriots. They are criminals. The outcome of the recent election must be respected. Law and order must be restored immediately. And way back in the day, that had 10 replies and 23 retweets and 161 likes. But apparently, Heritage must have ordered Luke Coffey to remove that tweet, to delete it. And I don't know, I guess he did. Anyway, Christian goes on to say, before joining Heritage, Kevin Roberts helped, quote, simulate, right, a violent/contested 2020 election that Trump would win. That's what we ended up trying to read at the close of last week's Friday show. Roberts and his fellow wargamers imagined that Oath Keepers and Proud Boys would team up with pro-Trump sheriffs to fight left-wing rioters. How do you like that? That's kind of interesting. That is rather more specific than usual. There's some screen grabs here, and they are of the, I guess, the credits, or a page, I guess what you would call it, the authors and acknowledgments. Claremont Institute is up top here, along with the Texas Public Policy Foundation on their 79 days report, and highlighted here in purple. It's a nice touch. Kevin Roberts, Executive Director, Texas Public Policy Foundation, I guess before he became Heritage Foundation. And then I mentioned to you that there were some other names that you would recognize here, perhaps Chuck DeVore, John Eastman, certainly, and K.T. McFarland as well, among the not-so-luminous luminaries. But at any rate, yeah, and then another screen grab here. Let's go see what that one is. Right, November 5th through 12th. This is their rundown of the war game. The law enforcement scenario he's highlighting for us. Riot control efforts continue throughout the country. There are rumors that several sheriffs in conservative counties throughout the country are hinting that they may deputize regular citizens into posses should the lawlessness come into their counties. Where was the lawlessness? Well, it was their people, and they were in D.C. But anyway, social media is ablaze with volunteers from Proud Boys, 3%ers, and Oath Keepers, and other posse comitatus groups to form posses. It's all very interesting. And later on, we're provided with the entire, a write-up of the entire report. Now, at this point, I think what we did on Friday was we dove into the first article that was attached, the one from the Dispatch, which was partisanship over policy at the Heritage Foundation. And I guess this will provide us with some of the background of what's going on at Heritage that might have moved them to become pro-insurrection, or at least to insist that those who were anti-insurrection shut their mouths and delete their tweets to that effect. This was, again, in the Dispatch, Audrey Fahlberg, Fahlberg, and Charlotte Lawson. What's the Dispatch? Hey, I don't know. Audrey Fahlberg reports on Congress and campaigns for the Dispatch. She previously interned for the Wall Street Journal. And Charlotte Lawson, reporter also for the Dispatch, graduate of UVA, where she double majored in global security and history. So I guess it's feeling like not a long established organization necessarily, but at any rate, let's see what they have to say. I'm sure that they do an admirable job in rounding up the news here. Partisanship over policy at the Heritage Foundation. Interviews with more than a dozen current and former employees reveal how the think tank sidelines its scholars to score political points. That sounds like the Heritage Foundation to me. In the weeks after Russian tanks rolled across the Ukrainian border on February 24th, Luke Coffey was busy crafting the Heritage Foundation's proposed policy responses. Remember this part? As the think tank's lead policy analyst on Ukraine, he saw the House's $40 billion supplemental aid package to the country that, later that spring as the practical culmination of his research. Let's not blow it, Coffey, then director of Heritage Foundation's Douglas and Sarah Allison Center for Foreign Policy, tweeted on May 10th. Everybody has naming rights over the Heritage Foundation. Coffey claims that within a day, Heritage senior leadership ordered him to delete the post. They were suddenly, I guess, pro-Russian. What an odd thing for the Heritage Foundation. Remember, Heritage. It's heritage, not hate. It's also America, not Russia, but whatever. Heritage Action, the think tank's 501c4 sister organization, had taken a different view. Executive Director Jessica Anderson implored House Republicans to sink the legislation, writing, "This proposed Ukraine aid package takes money away from the priorities of the American people and recklessly sends our taxpayer dollars to a foreign nation without accountability." The bill passed, albeit over the opposition of 57 Republicans in the House and 11 in the Senate. "I was not looped into the decision to put out that press release," Coffey said in an interview. He ended his decade-long tenure at Heritage about a month after the statement's circulation. Other former staffers say they saw trouble long before Heritage Action came out against the bill. With the Heritage Foundation's 50th anniversary approaching, I guess it couldn't hold it together for that long, some former employees believe Dr. Kevin Roberts, president of the Heritage Foundation since December 2021, and other senior leaders have lost sight of the think tank's original mission, which I guess was America, but I guess that's out the window now. Where it used to function as a haven for conservative intellectuals to shape the Republican Party's agenda, many worry that the institution is attaching itself to a faction of the conservative movement that prioritizes partisanship over policy. And I guess you might say, well, who could blame them? That's where the money is. But on the other hand, the mission was supposed to be policy making. Like, to the extent that Republicans want policy thinking going on, they would fund the Heritage Foundation. But I guess they just don't want it. So you should close. But instead they say we'll adapt to the market and we will provide intellectual fodder for anti-intellectuals. Why not? Let's do that instead. Okay. Well, we'll read on and see if that's the conclusion they come to. Where were we here? Yes, right. Attaching themselves to a faction. You know which one. Interviews with more than a dozen current and former employees reveal restrictive workplace practices to keep scholars in line with positions favored by Heritage's lobbying arm. Remember, by the way, that the big concern among conservatives everywhere is campus freedom, that on college campuses, kids are being indoctrinated, professors are being suppressed if they don't, accord with the prevailing conventional wisdom, such as it may be. And it's all, of course, because of leftists on campus enforcing their own political correctness. Not this, because this is awesome. With Heritage Action's growing influence has come a wave of staff turnover from the rank and file to senior leadership. 51 employees have departed the Heritage Foundation, and 73 new employees have joined since January 1st, a Heritage spokesperson confirmed. There are 275 staff members on the Foundation's payroll and 30 at Heritage Action as of Tuesday. I don't know how recent is this article? September 15th. So not last Tuesday, but so things may have changed. But I was on a Tuesday. I can assure you. I'm willing to take their word for it. There are a lot of open positions, I guess because of COVID, and we have more people applying to Heritage than we have any hope of being able to hire. Open positions. Roberts told the Dispatch he said he remains enthusiastic about the organization's future. Asked by the Dispatch how many employees left the foundation in 2019, 20, and 21, a Heritage spokesperson declined to provide raw numbers. Several former employees cited Heritage's departure from its foundational commitments. They're linked here if you want to look at what they are. Without the knowledge or consent of the scholars hired to translate them into policy positions as their reason for leaving. Others pointed to one-on-one confrontations with the members of the leadership team over the organization's ideological trajectory. Fights over who sets Heritage's one voice policy, like One China, which requires that all staff be publicly aligned on any given issue, have caused much of the friction. The one voice policy at Heritage has always, for 49 years, been difficult to implement, Roberts said. The difficulty is making sure that there is a conversation internally that gets us to a good spot. The nature of the one voice policy is that there are always competing goods. Some former employees said that scholars are increasingly being cut out of the deliberation process. When Heritage Action came out against the Ukraine aid bill, for example, it contradicted the recommendations of some leading subject matter experts without notifying them beforehand. In April, Coffey had written a heritage policy paper pushing for the U.S. to, quote, ensure the free and unrestricted transfer of weapons, munitions, and other supplies to the Ukrainians, including a continuous flow of intelligence. In another, he urged that the U.S. establish a persistent and continuing presence on NATO's Eastern Front. The May legislation aimed to do that by replenishing available emergency funding to Ukraine for the 2022 fiscal year days before it was expected to run dry. In addition to the $19 billion in immediate security assistance, $9 billion of which was set aside to replenish the U.S. Defense Department's own arsenal, the bill allocated $3.9 billion to support American forces stationed in Europe and $2 billion for NATO and Pentagon modernization initiatives. A further $16 billion went to economic support to Ukraine and global humanitarian aid programs. The opposition to the Ukraine supplemental was irreconcilable with not only my views on U.S. support in Ukraine, but everything I've written on this matter for years. So I couldn't be truthful and honest by remaining there. Coffey, now a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, said about his decision to leave Heritage. It hasn't made him less conservative. It just, depending on how you define conservative. Anyway, you see what he didn't like leave and join, Center for American Progress or anything like that. Alexis Mracek, a former policy analyst at Heritage who specialized in Russia and Eurasia, pointed to the institutional inconsistencies behind the decision to oppose the bill. We had established a one-voice policy on Ukraine over the past several years, she said, but Heritage Action contradicted our one-voice policy on Ukraine, and in the process created a new one-voice policy on Ukraine that I was not allowed to contradict. Mracek resigned from Heritage in July and joined the International Republican Institute. So it's an interesting trick they're pulling there. Yeah, we still have the one-voice policy. It's just that one voice that we had, we don't like that voice anymore. So the new one voice is this one instead, and none of you have any input in it. But I'm calling it one voice, and that's that. That's interesting. Well, let's see. Our policy didn't change. Jim Carafano, remember, he's the one on the article who was saying the opposite of what it looks like he's about to say here. Our policy didn't change. Jim Carafano, who leads Heritage's foreign policy and defense team, said, "We are for an independent Ukraine that can defend itself. We're for government bills that are fiscally responsible, and we're for plans that actually work." Oh, I see. Carafano pointed to the legislation's investments in so-called civil society programs, arguing that they would fuel fraud, waste, and corruption. But the policy shop has only released one alternative legislative strategy since the supplemental bill's passage, advocating for a fiscally calculated approach to the conflict. A notable change from the tone and frequency of previous reports. A recent video on Heritage's Instagram features the caption, "We can't afford to give Ukraine more money." And on September 7th, Heritage Action released a statement opposing the additional Ukraine-related money Biden requested in his continuing resolution to fund the government. Anyway, I guess you can pretty much see what's happening here. This is an awfully long article. Perhaps we'll continue on just probing a little bit and see what's happening beneath the surface at Heritage. But what I think is pretty clear here is that there's a conflict between the people who say, from a conservative viewpoint, it just so happens that our interests will align with the Biden administration's interests here because it's in the United States' interest that we do what we can to bolster a free and independent Ukraine versus an aggressive and expansionist Russia. Everybody used to agree about that. But, of course, the prevailing sentiment in the Republican Party now is it doesn't matter what the policy outcome is. We must oppose what Biden supports. And to the extent that we can't reconcile that, as Jim Carafano can't, then you say, well, I'm for a free Ukraine. I just think that the way that Biden is doing it is wasteful and terrible and awful for various reasons, and will totally lead to Wade, Frost, and abuse. Yeah, wading into the waste, fraud, and abuse. You remember the old phrase of these. I think he changed it up a little bit, and he said, fuel, fraud, waste, and corruption. So he threw in an extra or different word there, but that's the claim. There's no, bolstering of the claim. I just think it will, because Biden is going to do it. So that's the way he deals with it. He likes his job too much and he doesn't want to lose it or move to another place. So that's how he reconciles these things. It's kind of interesting. Where else were we with this? We were going to read on the, yes, right. The disputes extended beyond the debate over Ukraine and preceded Roberts' leadership. Several former experts and researchers detailed limitations on their intellectual freedom beginning in the Trump era, such as being told to delete tweets and ignore areas of agreement with perceived political opponents. See, I'm pretty sure that's what was driving this. In almost every case, the restrictive measures served a partisan end. There were several instances where I was asked to scrub the phrase President Trump from my pieces. I think it was to tamp down any suspected criticism, said one former Heritage employee, speaking on the condition of anonymity to speak candidly about internal dynamics. That doesn't really make any sense, does it? We were definitely discouraged from mentioning the Biden administration by name as well, unless we were attacking them. I'm not sure why they would scrub President Trump from the pieces, but okay. Another former employee said staffers were also told to avoid referring to incoming President Joe Biden as the president-elect until electoral votes were certified on January 6, 2021, to avoid lending implicit legitimacy to the 2020 election. But it seems like they continued with that even after January 6th. One former employee recalled being instructed by management not to quote or cite Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, because of his strained relationship with former President Donald Trump. Another former employee said Heritage leaders declined a request to conduct a public panel with Republican Senator Mitt Romney for similar reasons. That's pretty strange. At the tail end of the Trump presidency, one former communications staffer said the media team shut down requests to schedule economics scholars for television appearances about the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement to preemptively quash any public criticism of Trump's support for the trade deal. In one encounter, a member of senior management approached a scholar to challenge the scholar's stance on a policy issue, referencing a conflicting position taken by Fox News host Tucker Carlson on the air. The scholar recalled saying, "I don't watch Tucker Carlson's monologue anymore." The senior staffer allegedly replied, "Well, you ought to watch it because the people who pay your salary watch it." This ethos may have made its way into the policy shop's output, which increasingly resembles public positions taken by Carlson on topics ranging from election integrity to big tech. The storming of the Capitol was another sensitive topic for senior management. Coffey recalls being required by management to remove a Twitter post condemning the January 6th Capitol riots. Some employees went from avoiding criticism of January 6th to actively amplifying conspiracy theories related to the day's events. That includes on the Daily Signal podcast, where Daily Signal executive editor Rob Bluey hosted Julie Kelly, author of January 6th, How Democrats Used the Capitol Protest to Launch a War on Terror Against the Political Right, in February of 2022 for a conversation about the Capitol riot. This is interesting, too, because it was actually Bluey that I was thinking of when we started reading about this, and I was wondering whether he still worked there. He, back in who knows when, 18, whatever it was, when, I guess when I had pretty much just started working, like actually on the front page at Daily Kos, and we did like Washington Journal together or something, and they brought in Bluey, and he was the Heritage Foundation's new blogger. They had just started a blog because we had a blog and they had to have a blog because they're Republicans, and Democrats had done well with the blog, so they were going to have a blog now. Anyway, I found the whole thing kind of stupid and disingenuous. And of course, I don't know if we actually had this discussion beforehand or when we got on the air or what, but he was generally speaking, I think I had said something where he was like, oh, I'm really surprised to find out that you are, supportive of the free market solution to XYZ or something. And I had said something. I think we were being asked about the fairness doctrine and whether we wanted to reinstate the fairness doctrine. And I think I actually said, I'm not actually particularly interested in that. It's far more interesting to, I don't know, examine whatever the hell it was people were saying. I don't even remember what the answer was, but I was just saying that generally speaking, no, it wasn't something we were screaming about. We had to have the fairness doctrine back. We were, ready to compete, in the open market of ideas. And he was like, oh, I'm surprised that you'd be willing to do that. And I was kind of like, I'm surprised you're willing to do it because, at Daily Kos, at the time, I still think there was advertising, there still is advertising done on Daily Kos, but it was a subscription model and some advertising that was supporting Daily Kos at the time. I think much more advertising than subscriptions at that particular moment in time. Whereas you're blogging on a fully subsidized, well, I don't think I probably wouldn't have said wingnut welfare if we said it on the air, but I don't even know if we actually had that discussion on the air or not. But I think that sort of took him back a little bit, like, you know what, that is kind of weird. Although ultimately he didn't accept it. But anyway, he seemed like not a complete lunatic guy. He was right wing, the kind of guy who in his 20 somethings would take a job blogging for the Heritage Foundation. Is it is what it is. And I wondered whether he was still around. And I guess A, he's still around, and B, he's apparently, this is the guy they're using to reference the some employees going from avoiding criticism of January 6th to actively amplifying conspiracy theories. So I guess we know either where his brain is at, or at least where his brain thinks his bread and butter is anyway. So, well, all right. There's not much to make of it because none of you know who Robert Bluey is. And if you did, you wouldn't care very much either. But little anecdote. It was about me. So that's why I did it. See? Okay. Well, at any rate, he hosted another lunatic, Julie Kelly, to talk about her lunatic book. Great. During the conversation, Kelly accused Biden, former President George W. Bush, who's the, oh no, we're not in that guy's article yet, Christian Vanderbrook yet, but he works for W. Anyway, Kelly accused Biden, Bush, and the media, of course, of colluding to brand the day an insurrection. It was like a fusion GPS type orchestrated campaign, PR campaign, but then a little more sinister behind the scenes. They bashed the skull of a cop in with a fire extinguisher, or maybe not, but also pepper sprayed cops, beat him with flagpoles, smushed him in the door, punched him in the face, whatever. But that was PR. Yeah. Anyway, many argue that the organization's goal is now to appease rather than to inform and persuade the Republican base. We couldn't decide who our primary audience was anymore, recalled one former employee. We were focused more on reaching the grassroots and maybe even influencing outcomes in elections than we were on making sure that the right policy ideas, that the principal policy ideas got into the hands of the principal policymakers. And by the way, that used to be the real power of the Heritage Foundation, was that, look, no matter what you may do with your elections, Republicans are always at or near the seat of power. Even when they were in the minority for 40 years, they were at the table, and it was important to them to present ideas that would rival Democratic ideas and try to actually win a vote on it, or try to persuade voters that their positions were better. That was always the mission. And then when they did come to power, that there would be reams of policy initiatives that could be taken right off the shelf and turned into legislation and litigation. True. But they would be able to, the real Republican power in governance when they governed was that they could ram through these things that had been percolating up through the think tanks for years and were just ready to go off the shelf. And even though you had elected chiefly morons to office, candidates with their campaigns in a box that had no idea what to do once the Newt Gingrich scripts stopped coming in the mail, it didn't matter because Gingrich would endorse something, put this thing on the floor, and then if it was a question of, what do I tell my constituents about this legislation? I don't know anything about it. Here, read this Heritage Foundation thing. Or just, hell, copy this Heritage Foundation thing on your letterhead and say this is what you think about this thing. And now they don't do that. It's interesting that they just parrot, but might be worth more money. They just parrot the stuff back to the lunatics who support them. But that base has changed. Anyway, it's an interesting thing that they would give up their power, but I guess it's another indication of just Republicans' disinterest in actually governing. All they want to do is own the libs. And this is like the latest, greatest indication of that. Where were we with this? Yes, Roberts, who maintains that Heritage's main audience is Congress, governors, state legislators, and the like, says that his public opinion-oriented approach is aimed at ensuring scholarly research isn't conducted in a vacuum. We often hear from our broad base of supporters who are not at all dictating what we're doing, but because we're close to them, Roberts said of Heritage's roughly 500,000 donors. More than any other organization on the right in the United States, we have a clear understanding of where everyday conservative Americans are. According to Heritage's website, only 2% of its support comes from corporate donors. Carafano added, in relation to challenging the GOP's orthodoxy on foreign policy issues, if people are a little angry at us and upset or confused or whatever, I think that's the price we're paying because I think we're doing exactly what the American people want. Roberts, who previously served as CEO of the Texas Public Policy Foundation and president of Wyoming Catholic College, Texas Public Policy, Wyoming Catholic College, Heritage Foundation in D.C., whatever. What a jet setter. What an elite. Anyway, Roberts made clear from his first day on the job that Heritage will always be on offense to push the organization's preferred policies, people, and strategies, said Rob Bluey, Heritage's vice president of communications. He is now, Well, at least I'll say this for him. He stayed in the organization and he rose in the organization, and why leave? It's a pretty cushy thing, and I didn't, and there you go. Anyway, so I'm not the vice president of anything. but I am the president of the temple. So how about that? Let you see that show up on Rob Bluey's resume. Anyway, where we leave off? Oh, yes. We were talking about him being a vice president. What those policies, people, and strategies are might also be up to Roberts. It's not a one-voice policy. It's a one-person policy, one former employee said. Some say this is a departure from the organization's founding mission. Heritage's incorporation in 1973 as a 501c3 research institution filled what many right-wing intellectuals understood at the time to be a void in the conservative think tank space. Heritage swiftly rose to prominence in the early 1980s after its founders published its Mandate for Leadership. That should have some echo on it. Mandate for Leadership. Something like that. Makes more sense. What became a 1,100-page policy manuscript to assist Republican President Ronald Reagan's White House. The playbook included 2,000 policy proposals dedicated to advancing Heritage's 4 main policy objectives: free competitive enterprise, limited government, individual liberty, and a strong national defense. Sounds familiar? More than 4 decades since Reagan was sworn into office, Roberts' vision for the organization recalls the leadership style championed by former Heritage President and South Carolina Senator Jim DeMint, who presided over the think tank from 2013 until 2017. The feeling that many of us had is that when DeMint came to Heritage, he brought his Senate battles with him, recalled one former employee. Interesting. Some scholars say that under DeMint, senior leaders discouraged them from criticizing Trump's policies even before he took office. Brian Riley, a trade policy analyst at Heritage from 2010 to 2017, recalled holding his tongue on trade issues during the 2016 election to avoid clashing with the then candidate Trump's views. As director of the Free Trade Initiative at the National Taxpayers Union, he said he no longer feels he needs to self-censor. When I came here, the idea was to just address the policies without regard to whether it's Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump or Mitt Romney or Josh Hawley, Riley said. Which is kind of how you are, I think we're all supposed to think that's how it is at think tanks. If it's not that way, you're just in a tank, right? But to make it a think tank, you're going to have to think. Anyway, it was around the same period that Heritage's reputation began to complicate efforts by scholars to connect with lawmakers on Capitol Hill. If they were a part of Heritage, some recalled, they were also considered part of Heritage Action. DeMint was fired in 2017, I wonder what happened, by a unanimous board vote that followed internal disputes over his leadership tactics. Heritage founder Edwin Feulner, I'm guessing, Feulner, who led the organization for 3 decades, took his place until K. Coles James succeeded him in December of 2017. But even with DeMint gone, the partisan grip on Heritage's policy shop continued to tighten. While many employees take pride in referring to the organization as a do tank rather than a think tank, scholars who have left say that Heritage Action's ascendance within the organization has continued to muddy the distinctions between its research side and its lobbying arm. I don't mind the idea of a think tank that is focused on real-world impact and not just kind of pie-in-the-sky academic navel-gazing, said Klon Kitchen. K-L-O-N, Klon. Like, wow, okay. And Kitchen, like kitchen. Just a guy with 2 Ks in his name, and I don't know what his middle name is, just working his way through Heritage Foundation. The founder and former director of Heritage's Center for Technology Policy says, that's who Klon Kitchen is. Klon Kitchen. Wow. But what I think it's actually become, there we go, is a political action group that now uses serious policy scholars as a veneer to policy wash what is actually inherently political activity. So they should lose their tax exempt status is what you're saying, really. Kitchen, who resigned from Heritage in February of 2021 and is now a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, is the author of a national security newsletter for the Dispatch. So I guess there's something there because we're reading the Dispatch. Whereas scholars at right-leaning 501c3 research institutions like Cato Institute, the Hudson Institute, where coffee escaped to, I think, didn't we read that? And the American Enterprise Institute are permitted and often encouraged to disagree with each other about policy issues. Heritage prides itself on projecting the same voice on every policy issue, like Hitler. Oops, that doesn't say that. The reason that we have to have a one voice policy is because unlike those organizations that don't, we're actually spending our resources on affecting change in our world, Roberts said. That's nonsense, but okay. With the founding of Heritage Action in 2010 came the introduction of the Heritage Action Scorecard, a legislative metric that rates members of Congress based on how often they vote in line with the organization's lobbying entity. Some high-ranking congressional Republicans are candid about their skepticism of its role on the Hill. I've never understood Heritage Action. Representative Mike Rogers, the ranking Republican on the House Armed Services Committee, told the Dispatch this summer. I've just never understood their perspective on anything we do over here. That's not so good for them. Rogers has a 93% session score from Heritage Action and a lifetime score of 69%. Most of us get the Ronald Reagan approach, that the best way to keep the world safe is to have alliances, that the last time somebody roamed around Europe trying to take over countries didn't end well, said GOP Senator Lindsey Graham, asked about his reaction to Heritage's position on the Ukraine aid bill, which he and Rogers supported. Graham's Heritage Action session scorecard is 69%. That's nice. And his lifetime score is 57%. I didn't say that for Mike Rogers having a lifetime score of the same number, but hey, it's not as nice somehow. Anyway, it's unclear how the Republican Party's foreign policy aims might change once voters pick the next presidential nominee in 2024. For now, polls suggest that Heritage's recent messaging might not have the popular appeal its leadership believes. By and large, Americans still want to back Ukraine. Around 2/3 of Republican respondents supported military and economic assistance to Ukraine in a recent Chicago Council poll, and an August Reuters Ipsos survey found that the majority of both parties favor U.S. support for Ukraine until all Russian forces are withdrawn. And that's a quote. Some tension has emerged between establishment conservatives and the national conservatives on Capitol Hill, though national conservatives are from the dominant force in the GOP today. That's not necessarily the case at Heritage. Tori Smith, a former trade policy analyst at Heritage who resigned from the organization in April to serve as director of international economic policy at the American Action Forum, observed that a similar tension is playing out at Heritage, and the nationalist conservatives are winning. It's abundantly clear. In many ways, Heritage has transitioned from being the home of conservative intellectuals to an institution that forces its thinkers to take a back seat to the base. That's going to work out great because the base is super smart. Roberts and Heritage Action Executive Director Jessica Anderson were featured speakers at this week's, I guess a couple weeks ago, National Conservatism Conference in Miami. The gathering brings together right-leaning figures who are often hostile to traditional conservative positions in foreign and domestic affairs, such as Republican Senator Josh Hawley and tech billionaire Peter Thiel. I come not to invite national conservatives to join our conservative movement, Roberts reportedly said at the conference, but to acknowledge the plain truth that Heritage is already a part of yours. Kind of interesting. And interesting note to end with. And, well, that means it's it. That's it. We're done with this article. That brings us, let's see, back to the Twitter thread from Christian Vanderbroek, which this was the first article attached to the Twitter thread. And then a couple of tweets down was the reference to, before joining Heritage, Kevin Roberts had helped simulate a violent/contested 2020 election that Trump would win. Roberts and his fellow wargamers imagined that Oath Keepers, Proud Boys, etc. would team up with pro-Trump sheriffs and fight right-wing rioters. And that was from the 79 Days report. Now, that was covered in Christian Vanderbroek's own piece for The Bulwark, which we started to read also again last Friday, but this time I'd like to go through the whole thing. Hang on. Here we go. Notes on an authoritarian conspiracy inside the Claremont Institute's 79 Days to Inauguration report. Claremont's post-election war game provides a window into the group's ambitions. So this is actually from November 8th, 2021. So we're talking about a couple of months, nearly, I guess, coming up on a year, just shy of a year after the riot. And we already knew that there were plenty of think tanks doing the war games, but this is, remember, the one that was eerily prescient on how much violence was actually going to be involved and who the perpetrators of the violence might actually be. And remember that this is coming out of the Claremont Institute where John Eastman is sitting. And I guess, they too are think tanks minus the think these days, just like the Heritage Foundation. The sun, you remember this dramatic opening, the sun rises on January 6, 2021, while a nation is in crisis. So this is their scenario for their war game. Michigan's presidential electors are in dispute after a mysterious fire in Detroit destroyed thousands of mail-in ballots, ultimately throwing the election to Congress. The nation's capital is overwhelmed by riots organized by left-wing radicals. They didn't want to blame themselves from the get-go. And remember that a lot of the people who gathered from the right wing were there in anticipation of a left-wing presence, which was never really interested in showing up in the first place and didn't materialize, and very purposefully didn't materialize once they realized how obvious it was what the right wing was up to. Anyway, a Republican member of Congress in this scenario is attacked and critically injured in the violence, potentially depriving Donald Trump of the decisive vote. However, the representative heroically insists on being taken to the House floor with IVs and blood transfusions being administered. I don't think so. The member casts the deciding vote, giving Trump 26 state delegations and the needed majority. This is the grisly climax of a report published in mid-October 2020, prior to the riot, by the Claremont Institute and the Texas Public Policy Foundation, called 79 Days to Inauguration. And remember, at this point, the new head of Heritage is at TPPF, and, of course, the infamous and odious John Eastman at Claremont Institute. Constitutional scholars, along with experts in election law, foreign affairs, law enforcement, and media, coordinated by a retired military officer experienced in running hundreds of war games. Among these luminaries were figures such as John Eastman, lawyer for Donald Trump, and author of a memo advising Vice President Mike Pence to unilaterally block certification of Joe Biden's win in order to buy time for GOP-controlled state legislatures to send competing slates of electors. Also on the panel here, K.T. McFarland, who served as Deputy National Security Advisor under Michael Flynn in the Trump White House, notorious spy that he is. Other participants include Kevin Roberts, then Executive Director of the Texas Public Policy Foundation, soon to be, and now is, the head of the Heritage Foundation. Jeff, we had trouble with this on Friday too. I don't know, Giesea, Giesea. That's a weird one. Anyway, he's a Peter Thiel protege and secret funder of alt-right causes. Charles Haywood, a fringe blogger who anxiously awaits an American Caesar, an authoritarian reconstructor of our institutions. And then he's going to ask him, if you could be any kind of a tree, what kind of tree would you be? Oh, he eagerly awaits Caesar. Oh, here he comes. Anyway, yet despite the author's pretensions to scholarship and rigor, if you can say that about a guy who's waiting for a Caesar, for a simulation to be valuable, the other side gets a vote and actions must be based on realism. The final document is a frenzied and paranoid piece of work revealing the anxieties and aspirations of the authoritarian right. Practically, the report is an instruction manual for how Trump partisans at all levels of government, aided by citizen posses of Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, could, quite literally, round up opposition activists, kill their leaders, and install Donald Trump for a second term in office. What a thought, huh? The scenario begins late on election night. The networks have declared Joe Biden the winner, his campaign having upset Trump in the state of Texas. The call is withdrawn moments later following reports of a cyber attack involving the state's tabulation system. As it becomes clear there will be no definitive winner on election night, attention shifts to a few battleground states with large numbers of outstanding ballots. And then the report posits riots break out in more than a dozen major cities. 14 law enforcement officers are known to have been shot, with one confirmed death. There are unconfirmed reports of a car bombing of a police precinct building in Philadelphia. And then 6 months later, they discovered that there was all right-wing provocateurs, but that doesn't make it into the report. The violence, as imagined by Claremont and TPPF, overwhelms police and fire officials. Police recede to a defensive posture around their precincts. It is unsafe to maneuver police vehicles down the streets, and responding to calls for service, even emergency calls, is suspended. Fire departments are unable to approach buildings on fire without police escorts, which are not happening. The next day, the federal government announces Operation Spearfish, targeting leaders and agitators within the groups associated with BLM, Antifa, Boogaloo, and NFAC, which is what? I don't know. I don't know. It's linked here do I care that much? I'll see if I can go find out what NFAC. Oh, yes, I remember them. Okay. So this was the Not Effing Around Commission Coalition. Okay. Right. But as I recall, a black militia, essentially, who were themselves as well armed as any of the 3%er or Oath Keeper militias. And I'm amazed that, I guess I shouldn't be amazed. The only people that really remember those guys are the people who are, of course, oh my God, it's all left-wing violence, just like we said, like, John Eastman. So yeah, they're going to be cracking down on BLM, Antifa, and NFAC, but they throw in Boogaloo there too, as though that were left-wing. Or maybe that's their idea of being fair and balanced. I don't know. With over 1,000 arrest warrants issued during federal and state statutes, using federal and state statutes from RICO to disorderly conduct, the decision to obtain arrest warrants, even for the barest minimum of probable cause on the lowest of charges, is meant to remove the players from the picture, at least temporarily. Social media sources and other intelligence sources were used to find any instances of incitement to violence, threats, or other criminal activity that met federal or local statutes and act on them. They never do that. But, you could. The social media platforms certainly never do that, but they don't arrest you anyway. Remember, this narrative is the result of a role-playing exercise in which the participants imagine themselves as key decision-makers in the federal government. The actions described, therefore, might be best understood as a combination of group therapy and suggestions for how they believe the federal government and law enforcement should behave in a moment of constitutional crisis. Yeah, right, not great. Some of the report is revealing, some of it is sad, some of it is darkly funny. For instance, the author's recommendation for mass politically motivated arrests to remove the players from the picture sits oddly next to the right's outraged reaction to the prosecution of Trump supporters who stormed the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. There's more irony in how the task force imagines right-wing gangs would operate during such a period, with quiet discipline and in cooperation with law enforcement, instead of smashing their heads in, huh? And here's a quote from the report. A lack of social media activity and overt action by the rioting by members of the Proud Boys, there we are, draws the attention of law enforcement officials suspecting they may be operating covertly on the ground in several major urban rioting areas, but their exact involvement is unknown. Reports of militias moving into suburban areas is being monitored, always being rumored, and always drives the right wing up the wall. Anyway, several groups affiliated with the 3%ers and Oath Keepers have openly offered to assist law enforcement in putting down the violence via social media, touting significant current and retired law enforcement and military membership, which is not how the Trumpist forces behaved during the actual crisis. And as an example, a screenshot from the Washington Post with a picture of the headline, "The Capitol rioters kept posting incriminating things on social media. Unsurprisingly, they were mocked and arrested." And then a picture inside the building of, the old Q shaman and the various other nudniks that got arrested that day. On to the next section here. Let's see. It moved everything around by moving the pop-up ad out of the way. In reading the report, it becomes clear that the task force participants see law enforcement as a critical adjunct to the more traditional political actors, and that they believe law enforcement could act with greater impunity and force independent from, and at times in defiance of, elected leaders. From the report, there are rumors that several sheriffs in conservative counties throughout the country are hinting that they may deputize regular citizens into posses should the lawlessness come to their counties. Social media is ablaze with volunteers from Proud Boys, 3%ers, and Oath Keepers, and other posse comitatus groups to form posses. This isn't an innocent game of what if. Earlier this year, the Claremont Institute created a Sheriff's Fellowship program. Claremont claims that this program will offer, quote, training of unparalleled depth and excellence, of course, in American political thought and institutions, unquote. But then, this is the same group that produced a report hoping that, quote, several sheriffs in conservative counties, unquote, would give groups like the Proud Boys actual legal authority. Well, which is it? Law enforcement plays an openly insurrectionist role throughout the 79 days exercise, defying civilian leaders, refusing to offer them protection, and threatening them with arrest. For example, this really is a fantasy, isn't it? The report imagines Chicago police, with vocal backing from their union, abandoning Mayor Lori Lightfoot's residential block, permitting protesters to set up camp on her front lawn. In imagined dialogue, the war game quotes the city's Fraternal Order of Police president as saying, "We have officers risking their lives by not shooting people they should be shooting, or waiting too long because Lightfoot and her Soros-funded prosecutor Kim Fox, oh my God, seem more interested in arresting cops than criminals." The union leader goes, and it's not unlike their police union leaders though, I must say. The union leader goes on to defend a police sick-out. Fox and Lightfoot use this department and its officers as political scapegoats all the time. Maybe they will enjoy not having us around. And excessive force against rioters. Take a look out the window there. You tell me, what the hell is excessive right now? Boy, they really have vivid imaginations. The authors use an imaginary appearance by former Milwaukee Sheriff David Clark, useless now, on Fox News to issue an open threat to elected leaders of the political opposition, which is imagined as going viral. The police are here to protect people and preserve the peace. They will do that. Politicians might get in the way for a while, like they're doing right now, but at some point, cops will remember their oath and will take back their communities for the good, law-abiding people in those communities. You won't want to be on the other side of that once they have had enough of this nonsense. The National Fraternal Order of Police issues a partisan statement attacking Joe Biden's irresponsible call for peaceful protests, calling on President Trump to assist our men and women in blue in putting an end to the violence and anarchy and to restore law and order. At which point the 79 days report moves into truly authoritarian wish-casting. Wow. Federal and law enforcement officials entered into meetings with Google, Facebook, and Twitter to discuss tracking phones and electronic communication devices that have been traveling together to various cities to track various, quote, agitator groups. They would never stand for using that as evidence against people in January 6th riot cases, but okay. Checkpoints are established along major corridors entering Michigan, Texas, and Florida to stop and detain any suspicious caravans or large transport vehicles and to identify passengers for verification in the state fusion centers as members of Antifa and BLM are expected to descend on the Capitol buildings in those states. Yeah, they're totally going to do that. And they have large caravans of whatever the hell that's supposed to be. Sure. The FBI's elite counter-terrorist hostage rescue team is sent to execute search warrants for weapons in and around Washington, D.C. 7 Antifa members are killed by gunfire during the simultaneous raids with no injuries to the agents. Awesome. A barely concealed bloodlust runs through the report. During a battle with rioters at a Portland police precinct building, a SWAT sniper conducting Overwatch shot and killed one of the arsonists as he drew his arm back to throw his device, captured on police surveillance video and released immediately. Warning, graphic. The Molotov cocktail exploded when he dropped the bottle and covered several rioters in flames, 3 injured severely and 1 dead at the scene. They're really rooting for all this. But meanwhile, of course, they're the ones doing all the bombing and perpetrating all the violence and shooting all the cops. I don't know what to tell you. At a confrontation near the White House, a non-lethal directed energy weapon called the active denial system is used against protesters to great effect with limited, precise application to specific threats. Love the jargon. Social media erupts with claims of abuse through military weaponry. The body count grows with officer-involved shootings relating to the RICO-authorized Operation Spearfish, resulting in at least 3 suspects dead. However, none of the agencies is releasing information on the circumstances or identities of the officers or suspects involved, citing the ongoing investigation. These raids, which operate with all the impunity of a death squad, are executed in upper to middle class neighborhoods where the Antifa and BLM activists and leadership tend to reside. Yeah. The exercise ends with a crude myth-making, as if this wasn't, the noble and sacrificial decision by a Republican member from an at-large delegation suffering from life-threatening wounds, who, understanding what is at stake, demands to be transported to the House for the state delegation vote and arrives in a heavily guarded convoy. This isn't a serious war game or policy study so much as a bowdlerized retelling of the Turner Diaries. The 79 Days Report was created as a rejoinder to the bipartisan Transition Integrity Project's exercise on preventing a disrupted presidential election and transition. The Transition Integrity Project, abbreviated as TIP here, founded in June of 2020. I wonder why. The TIP gathered more than 100 experts, including Bill Kristol, editor-at-large of The Bulwark, to game out a number of scenarios, including the worrying prospect that a refusal by President Trump to concede defeat would lead to violence. The TIP final report also included detailed recommendations to avoid a crisis, such as educating state and local officials about their constitutional responsibilities, combating misinformation, and ensuring that protests were not hijacked by violent actors or agent provocateurs. Peaceful protesters will need specialized training on de-escalation and nonviolent techniques, and on how to document the nonviolent nature of their protests, given the likelihood that agitators will attempt to blame any violence on them, goes one TIP recommendation. Another TIP proposal is for military and law enforcement leaders to be particularly attuned to the possibility that partisan actors will seek to manipulate or misuse their coercive powers for inappropriate political ends. To the extent that the Claremont TPPF report offers recommendations, they are mostly focused on how to emerge victorious from the chaos, including preparation for destructive urban unrest with potential targets including ballot counting facilities, government buildings, especially state capitals and city halls, as well as television and radio studios. Take over the television and radio stations. That was the fault. That was the shortcoming of the insurrection on January 6th, it was once posited, here on the show, I believe. I don't remember whether it was us positing it or someone else, though. Anyway, the Claremont Task Force seems either resigned to or perhaps energized by the view that prudent steps are likely to be spun as preparations for a military takeover or coup and may result in negative consequences either way. Either way. It's as if they're steering into the violence instead of trying to avoid it. The message is clear. Do whatever it takes to crush your opponents, and all will be forgiven in the second Trump term. Indeed, the wargamers expect readers to find their work heartening precisely because the bloodshed and strife will lead to the outcome they desire. From the report, we hope that our work will reassure the American people that our system of government is resilient, having been crafted by the founders to withstand crises and emerge through the turmoil with a government of the people, by the people, for the people, that shall not perish from the earth, but endure to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our children, even though they've just done the opposite. But, if it's the outcome you like, it's freedom. That's quite right. Establishment conservatives like to pretend they can insulate themselves from the big lie that Trump won the 2020 election, but the big lie doesn't stand up all by itself. It requires the supporting architecture of smaller lies and evasions, like the claim that our republic was never really threatened because Donald Trump lacks sufficient competence. The particular focus on Trump the man misses the movement for its leader. Given the weight of the evidence against that larger movement, one wonders if the myopia is intentional. And that is the end, and the end sort of drifts away from the rest of the thrust of this thing. It's as if he wanted to get to that ending and figured he'd written enough and could now lay the rhetoric down on us. But at any rate, it's very interesting, and I have, noted in the past that there were multiple war games and studies and, whatever simulations that I recall reading about. I don't remember how many, and it may be that we just heard about the two of them and there were no more than that. But I do remember hearing that there were multiple such efforts on, but I don't think I ever knew exactly what went on inside this TPPF one. And it's quite right to point out, Christian Vanderbroek here, just how excited the conservative TPPF Claremont Institute one is about the violence and getting very particular about it. And there's a lot of cheerleading, it seems, for that. And of course, they've convinced themselves that it will be leftist violence that has to be worried about. And, lo and behold, the people who then designed the legalistic play that was supposed to underlie the insurrection, or that the insurrection itself was supposed to either support or cover for, depending on how you view it. Of course, it would then be his belief that any violence that happened that day, I guess prior to getting any of the clearer reports about who was doing what, I'm sure he did believe, at least for a time, this could be the left. This is the left-wing violence that we were predicting, except it was actually right-wing violence, which they didn't predict. But they did predict the involvement of right-wing militias, but they were there supposedly to restore the peace. And then once they were sitting around ready to go and they were bored because there was no Antifa to resist and no BLM to fight against, they just decided, well, we're here, we came for a fight, we might as well fight whoever's around. What the hell, we'll do this instead, I guess, unless you believe the other things, like that there were memos circulated among the Proud Boys for exactly how they would create the chaos and violence that they needed to facilitate the overthrow of the government, or whether there or as we read the other day, in New York City a few days later. Anyway, all very interesting and all documented, the report produced by conservative folks and documented here by Christian Vanderbroek, no raging liberal himself here. Very interesting. And of course, tied in some way to the changeover from think tank to tanky over at the Heritage Foundation, and I guess Claremont as well. And I guess probably the others to come as well shortly thereafter, unless some of them get some niche funding, or maybe the new $1.6 billion in the hands of the Federalist Society goes to some of the eggheads and intellectuals and props them up for a while, at least as window dressing. Or do you think they go hog wild and hand it over and demand that everybody go full MAGA? Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see until somewhere around after Election Day in November, unless they're biding their time for 2024. Well, that's rather grim. Happy New Year, everybody. All right, well, what would a new year be without stories about Donald Trump, the former guy? Yeah, can't totally leave him out of the picture, unfortunately. And so I bring you, a couple of stories that I've been holding on to for a little while that haven't quite made it to air. This one was kind of interesting, I thought, from the Daily Beast from a couple of days ago. Let's see, Jose Pagliari. We call his name all the time. This posted on September 14th. So about 12 days ago or so. Just been sitting here looking at me every day in pocket. Trump lied. Can you believe this? Trump lied. That's it. That's the whole thing. Trump lied about Secret Service concerns to throw off the New York AG. Remember the New York AG just came out with the whole gigantic civil suit against Trump. And somewhere I have a great Twitter thread from the AG's office explaining exactly what's going on in the case. I thought that might make a nice summation of things. I don't know whether we'll read it or not, but if you'd like, I can include it in the links for today. Anyway, what exactly is this Trump lie? It's about his Secret Service's concerns about something to throw off the New York AG. Let's see. Trump wanted home court advantage for a deposition with the New York Attorney General. So he cited Secret Service concerns with the AG's office. The Secret Service had no such concerns. Isn't that interesting? Wow. In confidential court documents, former President Donald Trump tried to squirm his way out of taking a trip to the New York Attorney General's office last month, telling a judge that the Secret Service had security concerns about the AG's office, according to two sources familiar with the matter. In the days before his August 10th deposition, according to those two sources and a third person familiar with the discussions, Trump's legal team asked that the contentious interview at the AG's office be relocated to a more comfortable, convenient spot for the former president, Trump Tower. That would be the one. And that explains what he was doing there the other day. The excuse appalled those who read it, spurring them to speak to the Daily Beast. In correspondence that was filed in secret, Trump's legal team notified state investigators that the Secret Service was opposed to transporting him to the AG's office in Manhattan's financial district, both sources said. This letter cited some sort of safety concern related to having the former president at the 60-story skyscraper at 28 Liberty Street, which is located just across the street from a Trump-owned building. Notably, however, these confidential court filings did not come with any kind of official affirmation or statement from the law enforcement agency itself, according to two sources. The correspondence does not appear on the public court docket. Well, there you have it again. Trump and paperwork, man. It's just not a real thing. You make him show you the paperwork. The Secret Service says that they have concerns. Let's see a letter from the Secret Service, like bringing a note from your parents. But no one ever asks. I don't know. Trump's last-ditch effort failed. Oh, I guess someone did ask. And the interview went on as planned, where Trump faced off with Letitia James herself. He refused to answer questions by pleading the fifth hundreds of times, strengthening the AG's civil case that the Trump organization was routinely involved in business fraud and dodging taxes and lying about the value of numerous properties across the country. Reached on Thursday, the Secret Service was caught by surprise by the allegations and had not been made aware of any perceived security threat or court filings detailing them. Anthony Guglielmi, chief of communications for the agency, said in a statement to the Daily Beast, that the Secret Service is, quote, unaware of any security challenges at the office of the New York State Attorney General, unquote. Trump's lawyer in the case, Alina Habba, declined to comment about the correspondence, telling the Daily Beast the matter was ordered confidential by the court. Well, I just unconfidentialed it in my mind. What do you think about that? The AG's office declined to comment. The notion that Trump tried to change the rules of the game shortly before his law enforcement interview followed more than 7 months of delay tactics. Trump first ignored a subpoena and refused to show up for the deposition. Then he was held in contempt and hit with $110,000 in fines for refusing to turn over records. And then he eventually relented after losing an appeal in a New York state court. But if Secret Service agents weren't worried about Trump's safe space, what could the real reason be? Former Trump associates said they know. He'd be sitting behind the big desk where he has the authority. That's the only thing I can think of. It's his desk with chairs all around. It puts him at a very superior position, said Barbara Race, a former Trump Organization construction executive, we've heard her name from the early days, who walked into that very office up to 3 times a day for more than 4 years. Race, who wrote a tell-all book called Tower of Lies, noted that Trump keeps a very open office that could seem inviting at first, but the power dynamic would change as soon as you'd enter the office. 3 former associates told the Daily Beast they'd expect Trump would position himself in his large, swiveling burgundy leather chair. He loves the burgundy stuff. That sits just slightly higher than the red velvet egg-shaped baskets that serve as guest chairs. He commands the room. He feels most comfortable in his space. There's a feeling of gravitas when you walk into his office. It's his turf, said Stephanie Winston Wolkoff, who met with Trump several times there while planning his 2017 presidential inauguration. Winston Wolkoff, who also wrote a tell-all book, Melania and Me, said AG investigators would have found themselves surrounded by Time magazine covers with Trump's face and all kinds of keepsakes on every wall of the office, the inner sanctum of Trump's shrine to himself. It's the newspapers and memorabilia, his photographs, things of him in his office. Even a small conference room is stacked with stuff of him. It's Hoardersville, she said. Trump Tower's 26th floor also has a large conference room without the ostentatious Trumpian decor, but former associates said he'd probably vie for his own office. It's his comfort space. Trump believes that the second these investigators enter the building, which has his name on it, that he's the one in charge, said Michael Cohen, who served as his longtime lawyer and fixer. Cohen, who also wrote his own tell-all memoir, Disloyal, and is now publishing a second one called Revenge, which means that the first one wasn't tell-all, wasn't it? Okay. Stressed that any attempt by Trump to relocate his scheduled deposition was merely a ploy to change the power dynamic. It would mean he's controlling the room, his office, his eponymous building, surrounded by his employees, he said. The tactic ultimately failed, and Trump was forced to show up at the New York AG's office. But the seeming lie that the Secret Service had reservations about the New York AG's office that would necessitate investigators coming to Trump's turf is just another way Trump has used the presidential seal as a shield. When journalist E. Jean Carroll publicly accused him of raping her decades ago inside a changing room at a New York department store, Bergdorf Goodman, as a matter of fact, Trump used a White House press conference to call her a liar, then employed the Justice Department to block her lawsuit. His administration blamed logistical difficulties for skipping out of the solemn and global commemoration of World War I in Paris on a rainy day in 2018, an excuse which turned out to be complete nonsense. And he ended his presidency by rewarding a long list of cronies and grifters with pardons for remaining loyal to him and never turning into cooperative witnesses against him. One infuriated source said that blaming the Secret Service this time around was just par for the course. He put it all on the Secret Service. It was disgusting, said one of the two sources who confirmed details about the situation. The AG's case against Trump for inflating property values could come to a conclusion any day now, and in fact, it has at least come to not an indictment, but at least the filing of the case at long last. For years, state investigators have been amassing millions of pages of evidence to prove that Trump and his adult kids were in on a scheme to enrich themselves by blatantly lying about the real estate they owned. James was elected in part because of her promise to go after the real estate mogul, and she quickly made good on her promise with this investigation. The next step could be for the AG's office to seek judicial action against the Trump Organization, asking Justice Arthur F. Engoron for something equivalent to a summary judgment, essentially declaring that the corporation is operating in violation of New York state law. At that point, the company could be dismantled and fined into oblivion. It's just one of the numerous ongoing cases that exposed Trump to legal peril. The former president is now experiencing a summer from hell, except now it's fall. So there you go. He is battling the FBI over his questionable possession of top secret government records at his South Florida mansion, Pervalago, a criminal investigation that could bar him from ever running for public office again and even land him time in prison. One might at least hope for that, but okay. Meanwhile, he's also gearing up for the Fulton County District Attorney's investigation, which already involves a grand jury into the way he tried to intimidate Georgia's top election official into reversing 2020 election results there. He also has a host of smaller civil suits that seek to hold him accountable for beating up New York protesters, duping investors into buying a crappy phone, and abusing his power as president to throw his former attorney Cohen back into federal prison. What a guy. And what a week for him. Okay, that's definitely of some interest. And then I had, there were another couple of things, not just the AG's tweet thread about the case, but oh yeah, well, this one looks like perhaps a slightly longer read. Do you want to hear what the AG had to say by way of summing up her own case? I thought it was good to go directly to the source on this one. Tweeted out by New York State AG. That's the name on the account here. And of course, it is Letitia James here behind the account, at least officially speaking. And so it carries our imprimatur, this explanation. Our suit against Donald Trump and the Trump Organization alleges a years-long financial fraud scheme. Here's how Trump generated false and misleading values on his additional financial statements, which were then used to pay lower taxes, annual financial statements, then used to pay lower taxes, guarantee loans, and get better insurance rates. All that's the fraud, you see. First, using objectively false numbers to calculate property values. For example, Trump's apartment in Trump Tower is 10,996 square feet. That's pretty huge, right? Yet he said it was 30,000 square feet to value it at $327 million. A New York City apartment has never sold for that much. What else? Ignoring legal restrictions on properties. At Trump Park Avenue, he valued 12 rent-stabilized units at market rate, inflating the value by 65 times. But by the way, that points up the value of rent stabilization, doesn't it? 65 times. Geez. At Mar-a-Lago, he ignored development restrictions to claim the property was worth $739 million. Its value, actually about $75 million, 10 times less than he was claiming. Using schemes to increase the values of his golf clubs is listed here. One such scheme was to add an inflated 15 to 30% Trump brand premium, but then claimed that a brand premium was not included on his financial statements. He included it. Okay, fine, whatever, but then claimed he wasn't including it. It's just worth that. It's not worth that. Why did you claim it? Oh, because brand premium. But you said you weren't taking a brand premium. Oh, look over there. All right, well, what else? Claiming he had cash available to him that he did not. For several years, Trump reported money in a partnership as liquid cash. In truth, he was a minority owner with no control of the money. Using fraudulent values to inflate net worth and gain benefits. Like what? Let's see. Trump's annual financial statements included fraudulent values and were used for his own financial gain. For example, he saved about $150 million by receiving favorable interest rates based on the statements, right? You put yourself in a position of you're asking for a loan. They want XYZ interest rate on the loan based on their calculation of what sort of risk they have for not recovering the value here. But if you say, I've got several $100 million in cash, they might ask, what the hell do you need a loan for? But not their business. Whatever. If you've got access to the cash or you have access to value that you can draw from elsewhere and cover your loans if necessary, then they can charge you less interest. You're less of a risk, so you get a lower interest rate, you pay less. Only he was lying about the money he had and just doing it to get a lower interest rate. Well, that's fraud. Can't do it. Where else were we on this one? Yes. Okay. Actions have consequences. Along with referring the criminal violations we uncovered to the U.S. Department of Justice, my office is seeking to ban Donald Trump, Donald Jr., Ivanka, and Eric from serving as an officer or director in any New York business. We are seeking to ban Trump and the Trump Organization from acquiring real estate in New York for at least 5 years. Force Trump to pay $250 million in profits made from this fraud. Install a monitor to oversee the Trump Organization's financial dealings for at least 10 years. Bar Trump and the Trump Organization from applying for loans from any financial institution chartered in New York for at least 5 years. As Attorney General of New York, I made a promise to ensure the rule of law applies equally to everyone, even a former president of the United States. No one is above the law. Well, that sums it up nicely. And I thought, made it pretty clear, too. So we know exactly where we stand with this suit from the Attorney General in New York, and I'm all right. I think that clears it up nicely and without all the nonsense. That leaves us some time, I think, to talk about, 1 to 15 other things that have been waiting in the wings. Let's see. How about this one? Would you like to hear about this one? I bet you already knew this. For Donald Trump, information has always been power. ProPublica piece from not that long ago. Let me see if I can pull it up and give you the date here. Andrea Bernstein is the writer. It's another one from September 14th, right about the same time as his lie about the Secret Service. So, yeah, probably seemed related at the time. For Donald Trump, information has always been power, if you can call it that. People have wondered why the former president collected classified intel, speculating that he's just a pack rat, like tchotchkes, right? But he has a long history of gathering and wielding sensitive info to help himself. In other words, he learned the Russian trick of compromat. Maybe from them when they gained some on him, and he thought, what a great idea, I should try this as well. Ever since the FBI came out of Mar-a-Lago last month with box after box of documents, some of them highly sensitive and classified, questions have wafted over the criminal investigation. Why did former President Donald Trump sneak off with the stash to begin with? Why did he keep it when he was asked to return it? And what, if anything, did he plan to do with it? It's true that Trump likes to collect shiny objects, like the framed Time magazine cover that was stowed, according to the U.S. Justice Department, alongside documents marked top secret. It's true, as the Associated Press reported, that Trump has a penchant for collecting items that demonstrate his connection to famous people, like Shaquille O'Neal's giant shoe. It's just his regular shoe. He's just a giant guy, which he kept in his office in New York's Trump Tower. But I've covered Trump and his business for decades, and there's something else people around him have told me over and over again. Trump knows the value of hoarding sensitive, secret information and wielding it regularly and precisely for his own ends. The 76-year-old former host of The Apprentice came up in the world of New York tabloids, where trading gossip was the coin of the realm. Certainly, sometimes he just wanted to show off that he knew things about important people, but he also has used compromising information to pressure elected officials, seek a commercial advantage, or blunt accountability and oversight. A Trump spokesperson did not respond to a request for comment. Take a little-known episode where Trump tried to pressure former Republican New Jersey Governor Christine Todd Whitman. Remember her? Way back when. In 1997, Trump, then a major casino owner in Atlantic City, and he never should have been, was furious with New Jersey elected officials for supporting a $330 million tunnel project. The tunnel would run from the Atlantic City Expressway almost to the doorstep of a casino run by then rival Steve Wynn. Trump didn't want Wynn in Atlantic City, Whitman recently told me. Trump wanted to control the gambling there. As a casino owner, Trump wasn't able to make donations in New Jersey's legislative races, contributions being one of his go-to methods of attempting to exert control over governmental decisions, but Trump could run caustic ads and file lawsuits, which he did. When none of that worked, and the tunnel was in the final stages of approval, Whitman said Trump called her up. A few years before the tunnel vote, Whitman's son, Taylor, who was in high school at the time, this is a few years ago, remember this, had gotten falling down drunk at a private dance at Trump's Plaza Hotel off Central Park in New York City and had to be taken to the hospital. This is something that high school students stupidly do, and Whitman said to me that she was happy for Taylor to be sick to teach him a lesson, but in the call, Trump suddenly brought the episode up. He said it would be too bad if the press found out about her son's drunken antics. Well, not really. I mean, it didn't make too much of a difference by 1997. Anyway, he made the threat during the deliberations over the tunnel, Whitman said, and it blindsided her because the high school dance was private. Nothing's private in a Trump building. And Taylor's behavior had been a family concern. She had no idea how Trump found out about it, she said, but the episode made it clear to her that people collected and delivered sensitive information to Trump about what happened in his properties. She did not buckle to Trump, and he never made good on his threat. Many people who have found themselves, for better or worse, in Trump's orbit over the decades, people with far less power than Whitman, told me it was obvious that Trump collected information on people, delighted in it even, and he was not shy about deploying it. There was always someone watching. One former high-level Trump Organization employee told me what Donald would do is he would let the person know he knows in his around-the-corner way. He let the person know he was all-imposing and knew what was going on. Like most other former employees, this person did not want to speak on the record for fear that Trump would still come after him all these years later. It was helpful for Trump that people knew he collected information on others' less glowing moments as potential ammunition down the road. One top former New Jersey lawmaker told me that he'd been warned to be on his best behavior when he traveled to Atlantic City because Trump kept an eye on important people. Even as a rumor, it furnished Trump with power. It is an interesting tactic. In one infamous case involving a journalist, Trump wielded his knowledge about behavior in the casino town. In 1990, Neil Barsky, then a Wall Street Journal reporter, came upon a scoop. He was told by a banker that Donald Trump is driving 100 miles per hour towards a brick wall and he has no brakes in Atlantic City. 4 large banks had hundreds of millions of dollars in debt on the line. Trump was divorcing his first wife, Ivana, and trying desperately to keep his finances from her and out of the tabloids. Unfortunately for him, Barsky kept writing about Trump's financial difficulties. In early 1991, one of Trump's senior executives offered Barsky comp tickets to a company-sponsored boxing match in Atlantic City. His editor encouraged him to accept the ticket for himself to cultivate Trump Organization sources. In what he later called an act of bad judgment, Barsky also accepted tickets for his father and brother. Writing about the episode in 2016, Barsky said he later learned that after the match, Trump called the New York Post asking, how would you like to destroy the career of a Wall Street Journal reporter? The story that ensued conjured a picture of a malevolent Barsky extorting the tickets in exchange for keeping bad stories out of his paper. After it appeared, the editors moved Barsky off the beat, and Trump no longer had to deal with his tough financial scrutiny. A decade later, Trump tried the same thing with another journalist, New York Times real estate reporter Charles V. Bagley. For years, Trump had offered Bagley tickets to the U.S. Open. One year, Bagley finally accepted to advance his reporting on a story. Trump had been trying to ingratiate himself with an important beat writer, but now he had a piece of potentially compromising information. Finally, the moment came. After Bagley wrote a story fact-checking the opening credits to The Apprentice, I guess that's really super important, writing that Trump, quote, is not the largest developer in New York, nor does he own Trump International Hotel and Tower. Trump pounced. His lawyer sent a note to the Times threatening a lawsuit and stating that Bagley had tried to shake Trump down for the tickets and wrote the piece when Trump refused. The accusation was false, and the Times backed its reporter. So that's a good outcome, I guess. If people's gambling and hotel habits can be valuable, top secret intelligence has the potential to be even more so. As it was back in his casino heyday, just the knowledge that Trump may have compromising secrets and could use them confers continued power, or the desire to assassinate him. It's one or the other, really. The New Jersey tunnel Trump fought so hard against was ultimately approved, though Wynne and then Trump left Atlantic City. But Trump and Whitman never reconciled. In 2016, she declined to support him in the Republican primary for president. Displeased, Trump forwarded a letter to her. Whitman recalled that again referred to her son's drunken incident at the school dance. By this time, her son, who now works in healthcare finance, was an adult. As Whitman remembered, on the letter were the words scrawled with a Sharpie, "Too bad you don't remember the good old days." What a nice guy. And, just generally speaking, too much of a scumbag to ever have been left anywhere near the presidency, but it's a little late on that. Just a reminder, we've heard stories of similar use and collection of information that he's able to listen into the phone conversations from every guest room in Pervalago, whatever. Our supposition, anyway, that the bikini changing rooms, we would invite models over to the pool and say, why don't you go in for a swim? I didn't bring a bathing suit. We have some here for you in this beautiful, elegantly appointed bikini changing room that totally has no cameras in it. I don't know whether he did that. But at any rate, he also has, of course, the secret hideaway townhouse near the golf course in Virginia that was supposedly lent out to politicians passing through town as a safe house, but was in fact totally wired for video and sound. So who knows what comes out of that. There was the story of, I think it might have been the Trump Plaza, but one of the hotels that he was operating in New York where, what was it? He heard about a supermodel coming to New York that wasn't staying at his hotel, and he, goes after his begging, pleading with her, comping her a room. You got to stay at the Trump. It's it's the ultimate luxury, blah, 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 giving her the whole spiel, and we'll comp you and yada, yada, wanting the publicity of having this famous name model staying at his hotel. But then she shows up apparently with a boyfriend, and that seems to displease Trump, but who at some point, boyfriend as the reason or some other reason, whatever, gives himself, of course, the key to the room and barges in on them while they are, undressed, let's say. And, gee whiz, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Of course, he's barging, makes plans of barging in on models all the time and beauty pageants, teenage beauty pageants at that. But, just this sort of thing where he gives himself the keys to the rooms of famous models who he's cajoled into staying in his hotel. He's that kind of guy. And we've always known it, and now I guess ProPublica reports it, and then they published it recently, which gave me an excuse to remind you what a fun activity. All right, here's one more story which I feel as I've been derelict not to share with you. You may have heard a little bit about it, seen discussion about it, memes about it even online, on Twitter and social media and elsewhere. This comes from TechDirt, one of the only places that I saw just going out of their way to cover this story more in depth. And I guess it's a little bit complicated. It could get a little weedy, but a Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals ruling that is potentially troublesome, and very troublesome at that. Fifth Circuit, which is, I believe that's down Texas way and a little bit loony, as you might imagine, rewrites a century of First Amendment law to argue internet companies have no right to moderate. How do you like that? Again, from TechDirt. And right off the bat, I'm going to need my sound effects for this one. This comes, as they say, from the Bat Crazy Department. You know what goes after bat that makes you say, right. Anyway, as far as I can tell, says writer Mike Masnick, in the area of Fifth Circuit Appeals Court has jurisdiction, websites no longer have any First Amendment editorial rights. That's the result of what appears to me to be the single dumbest court ruling I've seen in a long, long time, and I know we've seen some crazy rulings of late. However, thanks to Judge Andy Oldham, internet companies no longer have First Amendment rights regarding their editorial decision-making. Let's take a step back. As you'll recall, last summer, in a fit of censorial rage, the Texas legislature passed HB 20. I do not recall that, but go yourself. I don't know. I don't remember it. But at any rate, it was a dangerously unconstitutional bill that would bar social media websites from moderating as they see fit. As we noted, the bill opens up large websites to a lawsuit over basically every content moderation decision they make, and that's just one of the problems, pretty quickly, a district court judge tossed out the entire law as unconstitutional in a careful, thorough ruling that explained why every bit of the law violated websites' own First Amendment rights to put in place their own editorial policies. I guess the impetus behind this probably was if you're cracking down on my conservative commentary, you're canceling me. I have First Amendment rights. You can't tell me I can't say this on your website, or you can't ban me for saying this on your website. And everybody forgets, down in Texas, I guess, the First Amendment applies, well, for one thing, against governmental action, not against website action. And two, the website has its own free speech issues to be protected here, but not in the Fifth Circuit. On appeal to the Fifth Circuit, the court did something bizarre. Without giving any reason or explanation at all, it reinstated the law. So no explanation. Remember, I've told you that this is coming to the Supreme Court. No longer giving any explanation to things. They just do this. But it reinstated the law and promised a ruling at some future date. This was procedurally problematic, leading the social media companies, represented by two of their trade groups, NetChoice and CCIA, to ask the Supreme Court to slow things down a bit, which is exactly what the Supreme Court did. Parallel to all of this, Florida has passed a similar law, and again, a district court has found it obviously unconstitutional. That too was appealed, yet in the 11th Circuit, the court rightly agreed with the lower court that the law was mostly, anyway, unconstitutional. That teed things up for Florida to ask the Supreme Court to review the issue. However, remember, back in May, when Texas initially reinstated the law, it said it would come out with its full ruling later. Over the past few months, I've occasionally pondered, sometimes on Twitter, whether the Fifth Circuit would ever get around to actually releasing an opinion, and that's what it just did. And as First Amendment lawyer Ken White notes, it's the most angrily incoherent First Amendment decision I think I've ever read. That's a quote. It is difficult to state how completely disconnected from reality this ruling is, which must be why it's so difficult to write about, and how dangerously incoherent it is. It effectively says that companies no longer have a First Amendment right to their own editorial policies. Under this ruling, any state in the Fifth Circuit, anyway, could, in theory, mandate that news organizations must cover certain politicians or certain other content. It could, in theory, allow a state to mandate that any news organization must publish opinion pieces by politicians, or anybody for that matter. It completely flies in the face of the First Amendment's association rights and the right to editorial discretion. There's going to be plenty to say about this ruling, which will go down in the annals of history as a complete embarrassment to the judiciary, but let's hit the lowest points. The crux of the ruling, written by Judge Andy Oldham, is as follows. Today, we reject the idea that corporations have a freewheeling First Amendment right to censor what people say. Because the district court held otherwise, we reverse its injunction and remand for further proceedings. Considering just how long Republicans, and Oldham was a Republican political operative before being appointed to the bench, have spent insisting that corporations have First Amendment rights, this is a major turnaround. And, as noted, an incomprehensible one. Totally gimmitarian, in other words. Frankly, Oldham's arguments sound much more like the arguments made by ignorant trolls in our comments than anyone with any knowledge or experience with First Amendment law. I mean, it's as if Judge Oldham has never heard of the First Amendment's prohibition on compelled speech. First, the primary concern of overbreadth doctrine is to avoid chilling speech. But Section 7 does not chill speech. Instead, it chills censorship, so that there can be no concern that declining to facially invalidate HB 20 will inhibit the marketplace of ideas or discourage commentary on matters of public concern. Perhaps as applied challenges to speculative, now hypothetical enforcement actions will delineate boundaries to the law, but in the meantime, HB 20's prohibitions on censorship will cultivate, rather than stifle, the marketplace of ideas that justifies the overbreadth doctrine in the first place. Okay, Judge Oldham insists that concerns about forcing websites to post speech from Nazis, terrorist propaganda, and Holocaust denial are purely hypothetical. Really? Another quote from the decision: "The platforms do not directly engage with any of these concerns. Instead, their primary contention, beginning on page 1 of their brief and repeated throughout and at oral arguments, is that we should declare HB 20 facially invalid because it prohibits the platforms from censoring pro-Nazi speech or terrorist propaganda and Holocaust denial. But far from justifying pre-enforcement facial invalidation, the platform's obsession with terrorists and Nazis proves the opposite. The Supreme Court has instructed that in determining whether a law is facially invalid, we should avoid speculating about hypothetical or imaginary cases," citing a Washington State Grange case. Overbreadth doctrine has a tendency to summon forth an endless stream of fanciful hypotheticals, and this case is no exception, citing United States v. Williams, 2008 case. But it's important to exercise the Article 3 judicial power based on hypothetical. Well, I'm sorry, I was going to say that's wrong. It is wrong. It's improper, was the actual word, to exercise Article 3 judicial power based on hypothetical cases thus imagined. Also a citation to the Raines case and others, explaining that the tension between overbreadth adjudication and the constitutional limits on judicial power are at play. So these, however, are not hypotheticals. This is literally what the websites have to deal with on a daily basis, and which, under Texas's law, they could no longer do. Oldham continuously focuses, incorrectly and incoherently, on the idea that editorial discretion is censorship. There's a reason that we've spent the last few years explaining how the two are wholly different. They have, we haven't, but okay. And part of it was to avoid people like Oldham getting confused. Apparently it didn't work, although really they probably never thought a federal judge would get so confused. But it didn't work, and here's a paragraph to prove it. "We reject the platform's efforts to reframe their censorship as speech. It is undisputed that platforms want to eliminate speech, not promote or protect it." What? "And no amount of doctrinal gymnastics can turn the First Amendment's protections for free speech into protections for free censoring." Wow. That paragraph alone is scary. It basically argues that the state can now compel any speech it wants on private property, as it reinterprets the First Amendment to mean only that the only thing it limits is the power of the state to remove speech, while leaving open the power of the state to foist speech upon private entities. That's ridiculous. Well, as is often the case with in-depth articles like this one does go on at great length and gets weedier and weedier as we go on. I'll skip around a little bit here. At some point, this picks up saying that the opinion goes on to argue that forcing websites to host speech they disagree with is somehow not compelled speech. Again, from the decision, "The platforms are nothing like the newspapers in Miami Herald," the case. Unlike newspapers, the platforms exercise virtually no editorial control or judgment. The platforms use algorithms to screen out certain obscene and spam-related content, and then virtually everything else is just posted to the platform with zero editorial content or control or judgment. And of course, I think you all know that that's just simply not true. And in fact, as the writer goes on to say, that's the whole point. Websites do engage in editorial control. That's why they're there in the first place. This is a suit over editorial control being exercised by websites. He says they exercise none. Then how did they get there? The difference from newspapers, though, is that it's ex post control. If there are complaints, they will review the content afterwards to see if it matches with their editorial policies, i.e. the terms of use. So basically, Oldham is simply wrong here. They do exercise editorial control. That they use it sparingly does not mean they give up that right, but Oldham thinks otherwise. Okay, that's just completely backwards. And again, it misstates the reason that they're there in the first place, which is really remarkable. Anyway, if this is actually material that interests you greatly, I do suggest that you take a look at this Tech Dirt piece. And there are probably somewhat less weedy write-ups about it, but they really do. This one, I thought, went further than most in pointing out just how incredibly upside down and dumb this was. And they said so right at the beginning. And they don't fail to deliver, but it does get a little bit weedy. This is, I hope, not long for this world. I don't know how they can apply this going forward. This is a purely gimmitarian ruling, and it'll be interesting to see, just as a test case, how does the Supreme Court, if they want to get rid of a gimmitarian ruling, go about doing it, and do they want to? That's maybe the bigger test. I mean, as we were saying the other day, what was the case we were dealing with? Oh yes, right. The case of the praying football coach out in Washington State, was it Oregon, Washington? I can't remember which. And at any rate, the Supreme Court was living with the results of its first overtly gimmitarian ruling, at least, well, maybe not the first, but certainly the most overtly gimmitarian ruling that they had made to date, in which they just simply insisted on ignoring the actual facts on the ground and insisted that, oh, well, this coach was in fact fired when he wasn't, and that the prayer was private and non-compulsory when it was anything but private, and everybody testified that they felt it was compulsory. So what the hell are you talking about from that perspective? And then on top of it all, they now are compelled to rehire the coach that they, A, never fired, and B, refuses to show up for work no matter what kind of incentive you throw at him. So he's not only has he not been fired, he shows no interest in actually doing the work anyway. And the school system remains out of compliance with the Supreme Court so long as he doesn't return to work. So, I mean, he can just, I suppose, I don't know whether there's any kind of fine system, or when might they decide that the Bremerton school system is somehow in contempt of the Supreme Court's order. But imagine a spiteful coach just deciding never to go back to work and instead make his living on the conservative lecture circuit, and then just saying, well, you know, as long as I stay out of work, they are out of compliance with the Supreme Court. It puts them in jeopardy of being, I don't know, fined or punished as contemners. And I can do that by relaxing and doing my own thing over here and taking out my revenge on the Bremerton school system. I don't know. Just came to mind to me as I was reading through this thing and the gimmitarianism of all that. I really was struck, though, by the Fifth Circuit's, disregard for the reason that they were there in the first place. I mean, what a weird thing to claim that these platforms don't do any content moderation ahead of time anyway, so therefore they don't do any content moderation. Now, why are we here again? Oh yes, Your Honor, we're suing because they moderated our content right off of the site. Oh yeah, right, I remember the not moderating that they were doing. All right, well, at any rate, we're wrapping things up. We may even be a few minutes early today, but that's the way it is when you're putting together one of these pre-recorded things. Maybe some beautiful musical interlude will carry you over to the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam, as always, following our show. Although, hey, who knows? Maybe something else will be following our show today, just for the hell of it. Anyway, we'll be back live tomorrow, Tuesday, and don't forget, in 10 days on Wednesday, we'll be out again for more holidays.
From netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
I can't help it. God just doesn't like regular podcast schedules. It's not my fault. So the rest of the year seems to work out pretty well, though. So 1 or 2 weeks a year, you have this problem. Anyway, do stay tuned. Justice Putnam comes up next, or else he'll come up with something else fantastic that'll keep your attention until we're back tomorrow.